So yeah, just to echo what Hayley said at the beginning, welcome everybody. This is the third in our series, Practicing Well series. It's our last conversation event for now, but it perhaps towards the end it'd be interesting to hear from you about how useful or interesting it's been, or other formats that we could think about exploring, or how we might expand the work kind of going forward. Just in terms of audio description, I'm a white woman in my 40s with short hair. I'm wearing glasses and a dark blue top, and I'm sitting in a room painted orange. I'm just going to start by reading some short extracts from my research. Then I'm going to go on and introduce our speakers. Then we'll hear from our speakers. There'll be time for questions, as Hayley's mentioned, a bit of time in breakout groups if that's something that you would like to do. And then we'll come back together again towards the end with the intention of finishing on time at 2:30. So in thinking about bits of the research to share, I wanted to focus on isolation and the symbolic relationship between instrumental and effective support. So I'm just going to read a bit of my research regarding those two themes. So generally, the work of creative practitioners who work in participatory settings is felt to be isolating. And there's a number of contributing factors for this. The breadth of individual creative practice and different approaches, working within a relatively small specialism, and or a practice informed by individual identity or lived experience, or it could be a very specific approach. Geography also has an impact, so some regionally based activities have relatively small peer groups with which to connect, which is less of an issue perhaps now we're fully integrated into the digital age. But the impact of late contracts, which when they arrive don't sufficiently cover preparation, planning, team meetings and evaluation activities, reinforces the precarious situation of creative practitioners. There are times when contracts are absent, with project parameters and pay arrangements shared across a series of emails or phone calls, which in itself increases the administrative burden. Having to ask for inductions, safety briefings, introductions to key members of staff, again puts the responsibility of connecting with an organisation on the shoulders of the creative practitioner. Many creative practitioners have at one stage or another had to chase late payment of invoices. And for some, I expect that that's a very regular occurrence. So multiply all of these factors, contracts, inductions, pay, across a range of organisations with whom creative practitioners may be working, and the result is an accumulating workload which can lead to feeling overwhelmed. And evidence from the literature review that I did as part of my most recent research kind of backs up that position, that self-employment in itself is seen to be isolating, practically having to organise everything, and that in turn having an impact on mental health. And it's worth noting that self-employment sometimes comes about as a necessity, but not necessarily a preference. So it's not something that everybody is choosing to do. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the symbolic relationship, the symbiotic relationship between instrumental and effective support. So when I published Artists Practicing Well in 2019, I separated effective support and focused on that because I was really interested in understanding the moods, feelings and attitudes that may arise as part of working creatively with people, and how these could be processed and supported through reflective practice activities. And the contributors to this research reflected that while many organisations do this work well, others are less effective. And this inconsistency is perhaps due to how well the complexity of the freelance position and the work itself is understood. So those two factors together. So what I'm asserting is that not all participatory arts work is held within solid foundations, and subsequently it is left to the creative practitioner to stabilize this situation through accommodating and adapting, and that places an additional and unnecessary burden upon them. And it's really important that within any effective support framework, a support conversation is not seen as a single occurrence, but rather a series of conversations that take place in a number of different ways. So it could be in a team meeting, it could be a debrief, but also thinking about having conversations before delivery, during and after the work has taken place. So neglecting to sufficiently cover elements of instrumental support, or to do this in a timely manner, contracts, pay, inductions, etc., indicates a reactive management or leadership style, which often results in additional work and stress for creative practitioners. This picture also includes a reactive approach to effective support, i.e. offering support after something has gone wrong. And this is akin to providing support when it's requested. So when the creative practitioner says, I need some support here, which again, this limits the choice of support. And sometimes when it is offered, it's based on the needs and preferences and the time available of the manager or the project coordinator, rather than the creative practitioner and what they need. So what we need is a proactive approach to both forms of support, and organisations who do this work well really understand the multiple benefits on offer. So if we have good instrumental and effective support, the creative practitioner is supported individually. The practice is also developed both individually and collectively. This underpins the diversification of the workforce, which we really need, strengthens the experience of participants, and also feeds into organisational reviews and sector learning. Quality practice is best approached by planning in advance, and we know this, yet something gets in the way. I haven't surveyed project managers and leaders working in this field of practice, but I'm thinking around some of the reasons might include the pressure to deliver more work with the same resources, moving into new areas of practice without appropriate training and support, so understanding of this work is limited, and just a lack of time and sometimes small teams having multiple roles. So the additional stresses and demands of the pandemic, so that's the impact of the furlough scheme, the cessation, and then the rapid reinvention of provision has also undoubtedly had an effect. So in my report, and I think Hayley will put it in the chat, I offer 8 recommendations for positive change. So moving on to our speakers, I am delighted to welcome Daniel Regan, who's an artist and from Arts and Health Hub, and then also RG Manuel Pillai, who is a poet and creative facilitator. And we're going to kick off with RG, who's going to invite you to contribute to an activity using the chat.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nicola. What an absolute pleasure it is to be here and to see or not see all the people who have come down, who feel as much as we do that facilitation is something to celebrate and something we can always learn to improve at. We are going to write a poem in the chat window, and it's going to work like this. I'm going to tell you a beginning of a line, and then you're going to complete the line, and then we're going to put them over a space of 1 minute. You'll have to type in to the chat window, and it could come up slowly or quickly. Good support means being seen and heard, listening, being able to flourish in communities, having time to reflect, and biscuits, of course. Good support is empathy, asking the unasked questions, solidarity, giving time, mutual respect, being noticed, seen, heard, and held. Good support means connection, being part of a community, treated as an equal, care and respect and time, understanding the need to step away into this circle of trust and keeping that body in check. Good support is holding me properly so I can flex best, being held and heard with understanding, emotionally and practically. It's knowing deep down that you're not alone. It's the trust, the inclusion and flexibility to different needs. Good support is thinking of others. It's being part, not alone, but feeling held. Well done, everyone. Give yourselves a pat on the back. Back to you, Nicola.
Oh, that was lovely, and thank you so much for reading it out. That was really beautiful. I'm going to hand over to Daniel, who's going to talk about his work and how he thinks about and practices well. And I'm just going to say, Daniel, are you going to start with an audio description?
I am indeed. So I am Daniel. I am a light-skinned brown man with a shaved head. I am wearing a very colourful jacket which has every day of the week on it in all different colours. I'm in my photographic studio in South London, which has very bright yellow and red walls. So as you can tell, I'm a fan of colour. So with that said, I will share my screen. Can you see that okay? Perfect. So I am an artist, and I am also the director of the Arts and Health Hub. And when people ask me what I do, it takes me quite a long time sometimes. So I've just noted down some of the things that being an artist involves. So I make work about my own mental health experiences as somebody with living with mental health difficulties. I work on participatory projects exploring illness and wellness with other people around both physical and mental health. I use my lived experience to support organisations that are exploring arts and mental health. And for 5 years, I commissioned artists as part of my role leading an NHS arts charity. So I'm super interested in support for artists and facilitators from two sides of the sector, as being an artist that's commissioned to make this kind of work, but also in my role commissioning artists. And I'll say a bit more about the Arts and Health Hub as I go through my presentation. So, I am an accidental artist. My lived experience, my mental health difficulties brought me to photography. I was not a creative child before that. I did not think I would grow up and be an artist. I was not taught about participatory work. On both my BA and my MA in photography, there was no mention of working with other people. It was just about creating images. No mention about working with communities and the complexity that that brings with it. So I had to discover and develop my own way of working through experience. So my route into this line of work was not a straight line. It was more like a curly squiggle, jumbled mess of me just sort of making my way through and figuring things out, thinking about what does best practice look like, learning from mistakes or learning from things that were uncomfortable, things where I realized that that job shouldn't have been like that. So I thought it would be helpful for us to think about value in participatory arts. There's the practical value. We know that value costs money and artists deserve money. And I think Nicola's research shows that. And there's sort of growing movement of fee guidance documents for artists to be able to actually say, this is important work and therefore I must be paid for it. We know that there's a huge emotional value to this work. This kind of work changes people. It gives them a voice and it helps them to feel heard. And we know that because there is a boom, an explosion of interest in participatory arts around arts and health, particularly through social prescribing. So we have that validation that this work deserves, the practical value. It has an emotional value and it can have real life health impacts for people. It's important work. So why are we struggling to hold on to the value? Why do we allow the diluting of the value? And that comes in this emphasis on speed and quantity over planning and quality. The focus is always on how many sessions can you deliver for this tiny bit of money, instead of thinking, how can we deliver the highest quality of these sessions by taking care of both the participants and the artists and everybody involved in the ecosystem of this way of working? So there's the lack of consideration for artists in both the practical aspect, like Nicola mentioned, and then that leads to not feeling emotionally supported, which for somebody like me who already has a mental health difficulty can exacerbate some of my health conditions. I think it's really important that we think about working with artists and thinking about how we implement that support from the very beginning. So it's foundational. It is not at the point of crisis. It is not when actually I've realized this project is really difficult. I'm working with a group of people and I feel quite triggered. And then I'm going to, possibly have a mental health episode as a result of my work. That should not be happening. We should be thinking about, the participants that are taking part. We don't want to get them to a point of crisis. And we don't want the artists that we're working with to get to a point of crisis. So all of these elements dilute the value of the work, which is so precious. And when we're thinking about support for artists, I think it's such a big question. And, we talk about how support is unique, it's individualized. For me, I might need to have some clinical supervision working with other people who have mental health difficulties, because actually it's extremely triggering for me to be a part of some projects. I might see myself in some of the difficulties that other people are having. And if I leave those sessions and it brings up lots and lots of my pain, I want to process that with a clinician. It might be that somebody else who doesn't have those difficulties is absolutely fine. They may just want to have a chat afterwards to talk about the practicalities of how the session went. But nobody will know what I need as an artist if they don't ask me. So in my role in commissioning artists, before I start thinking about what does a session look like, I'm saying to them, can you envision what support you might like if things become difficult? And then they might say, well, actually I can't because I've never really been offered support. So I might then start naming different types of support and saying, well, this is what supervision is. Or would you like to factor in a debrief? Or actually, would you like some coaching? Or would you like some books? What would you like? Because it's just as individual as all of these wonderful projects are that we work on. And then mentioning about lived experience. So if I know that I'm commissioning an artist who has particular lived experience and it's in relation to the project that they're working on, I'm even more sensitive because I'm anticipating that this could be really tough. And that isn't a weakness, that is a strength. That's why I've commissioned them, because they have their lived experience as an asset. I've been working on this project with some expert patients through King's College London who are living with musculoskeletal difficulties. And the theme of their exhibition is around crystallized intelligence, which I did not know about before. And it's essentially another form of lived experience. It's the intelligence that we have through living through things, through doing things, through reading things. But I really love the term and its elevation beyond lived experience to intelligence. Lived experience being something beyond just, oh, this is just my experience. It's actually a form of intelligence there that is so precious to hold on to. So people that have lived experience working in this sector they're not in a deficit because they might need more support. We owe it to them to support them because they have such value in understanding others. And for me, if I notice on a project when I'm being commissioned that you want to use my lived experience, you want to mine my lived experience, but you're not offering me the support, then red flags start to go off for me. Because my lived experience now is really precious to me, and I don't want to, leave a job feeling that I've sort of divulged my own pain in order to connect with people, but I haven't felt supported. When I'm thinking about care and about how we take care of artists, I always see this grey area of self-care and the collective care, thinking about who is responsible for what. So I know that if I'm frustrated and annoyed at my husband, I'll go and speak to my therapist because that's about my personal life. But if I go to work with a group of people who have particular difficulties and I listen to their stories, and then I leave this session and I feel quite distressed, I'm holding all of this pain, then I know that that is the responsibility of my employer, because what I shouldn't be doing is taking that home and ruminating on it and worrying and feeling isolated. That is the responsibility of the person that's employing me. That's the responsibility of the collection, the collective care. But a lot of artists don't know that. You know, perhaps they don't know what support they need. They don't know how to ask for that support. So how do we teach artists how to advocate for what they need to be able to do their job to the best of their ability? And for me, that's about flourishing. It's about, I think, equipping artists with the confidence to actually say, you know, to do this work, I need this. And for that to be okay and recognized, instead of being seen as I'm being difficult, you know, I won't get this job because I'm asking for more than someone else. We're not all the same. We all need different levels of support. And then equipping those organizations to think about how they ask artists for support. Like, what support do you need? And that also not being an awkward conversation that puts the artist in the position where they feel like, you know, if they say they do need the support, then again, they're being difficult. This should be a collaborative, collective effort to take care of everybody working on these projects. So there's a little bit about my sort of personal experience there. I'll quickly whiz through. The Arts and Health Hub is an organisation that I started because I felt really isolated as an artist working in this sector. And it's a not-for-profit organisation supporting artists in arts and health. And one of the projects that we ran quite early on in the pandemic for a year was a pilot project funded by Arts Council England, which started from a survey about what would you like to see from in terms of support from the sector, and it mirrored Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance's question, which were asking organisations, and my organisation worked with artists, for artists, and we were able to pick out 3 of these and secure some funding to deliver some peer-to-peer mental health support for artists who have lived experience of mental health difficulties. We were able to fund clinical supervision for artists that were working in stressful and demanding environments, where their commissioning organisation either had not considered that this artist would need supervision or couldn't afford it because it had not been put into a budget line. And we were able to offer some one-to-one mentoring for early career artists to be matched up with more experienced artists. There was absolutely no lack of artists that needed this support, but there was no way that we could meet that demand. And we produced a very thorough impact report about the project, which is over on the Arts and Health Hub website. And so going forward, we've been looking at how do we grow this? This was a small pilot, but there are, you know, hundreds, if not thousands, of artists who would like to access this type of support. And that's only 3 different types of support. There's no coaching in there. We could add in so many different types. And so we've secured a little bit of money from the Greater London Authority, some seed money. We'll be going back to Arts Council to look at 2022 and beyond, so that we're not just delivering in London, where I am, but that we've got another base in Manchester, and then also making sure that there's a national reach online to make sure that artists all over can access these opportunities. And we've also been devising some training for organisations, you know, who want to design a structure of support for artists. So again, it's not about crisis response. You know, what can we offer an artist when suddenly they're upset? It's actually thinking about what are the foundations of support that we can put in place for artists. And that starts with, you know, obviously factoring in a support budget into every grant that you're asking for, and then thinking about what does that support look like, and then asking those artists when you commission them, and having that all in place as the foundations before you start delivering. So a shameless plug there, that if you're interested, there is some training that organisations can book onto. I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you, Daniel. Lots of really interesting things there. I'm really taken by crystallized intelligence, and that's a completely new term for me. So I'm really going to have to think about that. And yeah, that idea of lived experience being an intelligence, I think that's a really good shift in thinking, actually. We'll move on to have to hear from RG, and then we'll come back together and explore questions for both speakers, if that sounds okay. So over to you, RG.
Brilliant. That was really inspiring, Daniel. And it's really nice to hear you speak in that way about the work we do and the importance of it. My name is RG Manuel Pillay, and I am a creative facilitator now for a very long time, probably about 15 years or something. I've always been freelance, so I've always sort of moved from company to company, and I've worked in all types of settings, from secure settings in immigration removal centres to prisons to secure children's homes, with young people, children, and adults as well. I've worked in schools and youth clubs and theatres and shopping centres and everywhere you can imagine, as well as working for some of the bigger players like the Roundhouse or Battersea Arts Centre or Kazoom Arts. I'm massively into advocating for young migrants, refugee, asylum seekers who come to this country, and that has led to me working in refugee camps internationally and understanding like how migration and our view of it differs from Estonia to Finland to here to Turkey. So it's a real pleasure to be able to speak about this. I've found over the years, like, I mean, I was listening to Daniel speak before about, oh, how it's the employer's responsibility to look after their artists. And even that sentence to me is kind of radical, right? Because who looks after the artist? The artist is just like, it's the person they pick up and they drop in a library in Manor Park. And I've got like 25 children who hate poems. And so I'm having to think on my feet, but I'm also having to deal with the fact that a lot of these children are affected by a system that I have spent my whole life trying to advocate for better learning and more play in the classroom and all those sorts of things. And so the artist, in my experience, has very much been, especially in participation, I've very much been on my own. And I'm sure a lot of the other artists here have had that. You've got a community of maybe 3 or 4 facilitators that have your back, that you speak to, you go for a drink, you drink away your sorrows, you talk about how rubbish everything is, and then you forget about it. And that was kind of where I was at. When now I feel like we had the 2-year break, a lot of facilitators were questioning like, where are we and why are we doing this and what is the reasons? And also I think the people who were producing stuff, who was sending artists in, were starting to think, oh, maybe we need to create this support structure idea. I think for me, I wanted to really chat about how important that support structure is currently. I feel like when I'm going into schools now, never has an education system and a political system been more at polar opposites to what artists fundamentally do. We go in and we see teachers anxious. We see a system which is top heavy and people trying to constantly learn with goals and aims and objectives, and those sorts of driving children towards a spiral of stress and anxiety, which will actually manifest later in 10, 15 years. And we know all that. So as artists, we go in and we try to create a space for rest, which is radical in a school, for connection, which is pretty radical in itself, for thinking and daydreaming. I always talk to kids about daydreaming, like, to be proud of the idea of daydreaming, but with aims and objectives every day, it's really difficult for teachers to daydream, let alone for their students. For wonder, for be open-minded towards chaos and the unknown. And then also finally, open-ended learning, which is really what I really advocate for, creating a space which is playful and fun and has the spontaneity to be really open-ended. So when artists go into a space like that, when I go into a space like that, you're constantly facing barrier after barrier after barrier. So when we talk about isolation, it's epitomized by the fact I spend so much of my days sat in a staff room when nobody talks to me, like just waiting for my time to come so I can go in and do my thing. And in those times, I really reflect about how we're on the same page, like me and these teachers, but somehow there's so much conflict within those roles. And the same goes within the immigration system. I've worked like in all these different settings with people from other countries. I've advocated for that for my whole life. And I can honestly say it's got significantly worse in the last 5 or 6 years. So that means that all my, whether it be marching or speaking to people or going to parliament and speaking, it's actually got worse. So that is in itself such a heartbreaking thing. From day to day, I come across people who share stories or share their experiences, their crystallized intelligence. I like it as well. And obviously, those things have manifested inside me and built up about 2 years ago, where I was just like super pessimistic. About everything and about campaign work and stuff that I had been passionate about before. The system was broken. It felt like all of us artists were just band-aids being put on a broken leg or something. And it was at that point that Kazum Arts were the first people to really like see that many of the artists were struggling in their own way, and they began to like look into the idea of what does support look like, which is a very difficult thing, which is an ongoing conversation and a very difficult thing to define. But for me, it was like a group coaching sessions where people were talking about where they were at, and that led to life coach things, sessions, which Kazum funded. And then it moved into reflective practice, so reflecting on the jobs. That was the only thing I thought was interesting about what Daniel said was he was talking about how outside he has therapy and inside he has this, but my work and my life are just completely connected 100%. So if I'm not in a healthy spirit, I'm bringing those vibes into a space, and that can be detrimental to the young people. So after reflective practice, it moved into therapy. And even after the funding stopped for Kazum, I continued doing therapy. I continued running 3 times a week. I continued yoga, because I understood then, after all the help that they had given me, what it took from me. I understood how being well in body and spirit was having a massive advantage to the participants in the space. So my work and my life was happier for that. But I'm paying for it now, right? So what they gave me was an understanding of wellness, what it felt like to be well, and to feel strong and resilient. I hate the word resilient, but you know what I mean. So now we've come out of COVID, or have we? Nobody knows. They're sending me into schools, but it seems like kids have so many lurgies, like they probably could have COVID as well. We've got like the Black Lives Matter stuff. We have war in many different places, including Nigeria, police brutality, the Nigeria problems, and the Ukraine problems. And so these come up in sessions all the time, and I have to facilitate those conversations, especially with young refugee asylum seekers. I have to facilitate those conversations, and that can be really heavy. And it means I have to be on the ball with the problems in Nigeria. I can't walk in and be like, "Hey guys, how you doing?" Because that would be not being prepared. So when I'm reading up on these political issues that affect the participants that I work with, I'm taking on all of this stuff. So people will say like, "Oh, you have to turn off the news." For me personally, like, I can't turn off the news if I'm working with a group of people. I need to be aware of what's happening with that group. And again, that's why having a space afterwards where we can discuss, or before, like discuss those issues and how they affect us, how they might be affecting our students, is so important. Finally, I'd like to say, like, along the way in the last 2 years, how many artists have we lost in this system? How many artists could not survive due to COVID and the fact that they couldn't get Rishi's handouts? like so many have dropped out, and now like I'm 40, but there's not many who are with me on my experience now. And so I really believe like creating the support structures is creating access, is diversifying the sector. When we think about diversifying the sector, we think of the Arts Council, we think, oh, I need to find a brown person. Let's ring RG up. He's going to fit into this thing. But actually creating a support network where you're supporting your artists, they'll grow and build on a much more sustainable long-term basis. So whenever we argue for looking after artists, that's what we have to think. If we don't do this, how many artists will we lose? How much experience will we lose? And thus, how much worse will our workshops get? It's a pleasure to be here with so many facilitators. Thank you.